Michael and Gloria have chosen California. The word hangs in the house like a postcard held up by a magnet on the fridge, equal parts promise and provocation, while Archie reacts as if someone has insulted the neighborhood rather than pursued a job. He masks the fear of quiet rooms with a performance he has rehearsed for years, a routine of swagger and sarcasm that is noisy enough to drown out the loneliness gathering at the edges. Edith moves between them, smoothing ruffled tempers with the same hands that fold laundry and ice cakes, speaking in that gentle register that pretends a calm voice can keep a family from breaking along the fault lines of love and pride. Even the baby Joey, with his small miseries and giggling charms, becomes a barometer. His diaper rash and his Naps' need for milk, and the way he reaches for whichever adult is closest all fold into the choreography of a household bracing for departure. The announcement that puts the final clock on everything doesn't arrive as a philosophical debate, but as real estate. George Jefferson has a buyer for the Stivix place, and the buyer's timeline is ruthless. Boxes reappear, tape snaps drawers are emptied and refilled, and what should be an ordinary move turns into a memory audit where every object is a question about what to keep. Archie hates the speed of it. He hates change conducted by other people's calendars. He pretends the insult is practical neighbor's money, the inconvenience of extra bodies under his roof. But what stings is the erosion of the status he never learned to name father as son around which the others orbit. In this moment, he is no longer gravity. He is scenery they are learning to walk past. Back under Archie's roof, the old arguments slide on like slippers. It is amazing how quickly ritual can restore itself. How fast two men can return to their preferred battlegrounds. What counts as culture? What kind of laughter qualifies as intelligence? Why a great book should be allowed to share the same. Air is a great pratfall. For Michael, Hamlet is an argument for civilization. For Archie, the Three Stooges are also an argument for civilization, a different one funnier and more honest in its way. The debate is comic and sincere at the same time, because they are not actually arguing about art. They are arguing about what kind of man gets to stand at the center of the room. One side believes the future belongs to curiosity and degrees, and the other insists the future, like the past, belongs to people who can fix things with their hands and tell a joke at the right moment. It's easier to call each other names than to confess the real fear that love itself might not survive an airplane. Gloria learns again the strange mathematics of being a daughter who is also a wife. She is bilingual in her heart, fluent in both men's languages, and exhausted by the labor of translating love so that it doesn't sound like betrayal. She will not choose between them, not really, which is why she keeps trying to invent gestures that make both men visible in the same frame. The evening that crystallizes everything arrives in the disguise of a nice invitation. Michael's new department head is in town and wants to take them to the plaza for dinner. It is exactly the sort of night that could accelerate a career, and exactly the sort of night that could wreck a family if handled clumsily. Edith has already begun a last dinner at home, a menu that tastes like gratitude and forgiveness and denial, all mixed together. The collision is obvious and still unavoidable to the plaza or to the kitchen table. Which future do you favor when both involve the people you love? Archie, who has always preferred battles he can win with volume, goes looking for leverage. He pictures his grandson's morning's cookies, milk the easy geography between one house and the next, and turns that picture into a sermon about duty. His argument is not quite fair, and that is why it is powerful. He dares them to confess that professional ambition is more important than the grandmother who adores their child, and then he stands back to see if guilt will do the rest. The trouble is that Gloria and Michael aren't choosing ambition over love. They are choosing a new way of loving that requires distance and responsibility in fresh ratios. But anyone who has ever said goodbye to a family member knows that nuance gets crushed under suitcases and timetables. What people hear is what they fear. And everyone in this room fears the same thing in different words, that goodbye might be a synonym for less. When the dam breaks, it breaks the way most family dams do, quickly and clumsily, and at the dinner table. Jokes harden, voices go flat, the air loses oxygen, and suddenly the conversation is no longer about an entree in a fancy dining room or a lovingly roasted turkey at home. It's about whether showing up equals love and who gets to define it in a family that has survived for years by insisting that the rightness of one person's definition must be obvious to everyone else. Michael tries not to flinch. He is trying to become the man he imagines, a husband who protects his wife's dignity, and a father who doesn't mortgage Joey's future to soothe the grandfather's demons. Gloria keeps her chin high, then low, then high again, because she cannot bear her mother's disappointment, or her father's martyrdom, or her husband's wounded pride. Edith apologizes for existence and keeps stirring sauces. Archie calls everyone's bluff with a threat disguised as magnanimity. Go to the plaza, be my guest tonight. Leave me out of this. What he means is, choose, and let me see what I am worth to you. The saving idea arrives from the same place that grief often yields its best counsels, the person in the middle who refuses to be crushed by either side. If the 10th anniversary of Michael and Gloria's wedding was supposed to include a vow renewal in California, then why not have it here now as a way of remembering that the point of marriage isn't a dinner reservation, but a promise? The plan grows legs faster than anyone expects because all four adults are still good at one essential thing: showing up for ceremonies even when they are stubborn and scared. Clothes are changed, a minister appears, Archie mangles names and jokes at the wrong moment, and still moves into position because there is nothing in the world he trusts more than a ritual that tells him where to stand. The words the minister reads are the softest hammer anyone could apply to this quarrel. Love together, yes, but do not smother each other. Stand like pillars that hold the same roof without trying to occupy the same space. Grow like trees that do not steal one another's sunlight. The counsel is old and new at once, and it settles over the room like a blessing that knows these people too well to scold them. Archie sneers because sneering is how he protects his heart. Edith glows because she has always known that love is a verb that tolerates foolishness and keeps setting the table anyway. Michael and Gloria say "I do" again, and for a moment the room remembers that vows, not victories, are the point. Goodbyes are always longer than the minutes they occupy, and this one stretches across the house like a sheet being pulled tight. The cab is outside and horn happy. A meter ticks, making time sound like money so that people can pretend all they're losing is cash. Edith's farewell hurts in the places where love is most practical. The way she presses a cookie into Joey's hand, the way she straightens his shirt, though it's not wrinkled, the way she smiles while learning to speak through tears. Gloria holds her mother and discovers that there are no words big enough, then tries words anyway because silence feels like a betrayal. Michael fusses over last-minute tasks. The stove knob a window, latch the bag with the baby things because tasks are easier than feelings and still count as love when you have to leave. Archie performs his usual routine about costs and distances, about the price of rides to the airport, because arithmetic is a strong drink he can handle when the wine of grief is too heady. And then the sentence that rewrites history arrives late and honest and therefore perfect. Archie says he doesn't hate Michael, he loves him. It falls out crooked, as if it had been rolling around in his chest for years, waiting for a runway, and the room receives it with the right amount of surprise. The two men shake hands in a posture that is part truce and part covenant. The gesture means what they need it to mean, that argument and affection can cohabitate, that the future will not be built on falsehoods about the past, that Queens can live inside California as a memory that isn't a chain. The door closes, and the house a character in this family story with its own temperament discovers what silence sounds like after years of conversation. It is not peace, and it is not despair. It is a stage waiting for the next scene, a room that has known laughter and anger and will now learn patience. The audience, if you imagine, one might expect a theme song to tie this together, some nostalgic grin that lets everyone off the hook. But the truth is gentler and tougher. These episodes aren't teaching us that the old days were better. They're teaching us that old days are the crucible in which new days are forged, and the forging hurts. Love costs. Permission costs. Letting go the most adult thing any parent ever does costs more than money or pride. It costs the illusion that you can protect someone forever by keeping them within walking distance. Edith knows this in her bones and lives it without speeches. Gloria learns it and insists that learning it doesn't revoke her daughterhood. Michael understands that ambition without reverence curdles into arrogance, so he binds his young future to gratitude. and finds that gratitude dignifies independence. Archie, who has spent a lifetime believing that rightness is loud and obvious, discovers that the bravest word is a quiet blessing whispered at a door. California remains mostly an idea in this telling, and that is correct. The point is not geography. The point is whether love can travel without losing its breath. The family errs and recovers, wounds one another, and then salves the wound with ritual and stubborn tenderness. They misname ministers and misjudge priorities, yet somehow find their way to a formula that grown-ups have been reinventing for centuries. Argue, if you must cry, if you can promise what you will, and then keep those promises when nobody is there to applaud you. In the long run, Joey will grow up with grandparents who love him from faraway parents, who loved him by making hard choices, and a household memory that includes a funny man in a chair who never learned to say I was wrong, but did learn to say I love you, which on the right day is the same thing. What lingers after the suitcases are gone is not the taste of a missed dinner or the glamour of a hotel, but the feel of rings on fingers. The living room ceremony has done its work. It has recentered the story on promises that are supposed to carry people across seasons and zip codes, and it has asked 4 adults to stand in the right places and say the right words, not because they are saintly, but because they choose to be decent. That is the quiet achievement inside all the humor here, decent people doing their best inside a culture that trains them to equate decency with weakness. Archie's final posture in his chair, beer nearby jaw, set eyes wet, without admitting it is not defeat. It is initiation into a new order of fatherhood where blessing becomes the main job. If he cannot be gravity anymore, he can be a lighthouse. If he cannot keep them in Queens, he can make Queens the legend they carry with them, the story they tell their own children about a man who was difficult and loyal in the same breath. And so the world goes on. Somewhere there's a plane rising into evening. Somewhere a mother checks a window she has locked 3 times. Somewhere a young couple moves boxes into an apartment that smells like sunlight and paint, arguing sweetly about where the crib goes and who calls home first. Back in the chair, a man who thought his job was to keep everything the same realizes the real job is to keep the porch light on. He will tell jokes the next time he picks up the phone. He will say something that sounds like an insult and means I miss you. He will ask for postcards and pretend he only wants them for his wife. The new rhythm will feel wrong until it feels inevitable. This is how families grow into themselves, by giving a future permission to exist even when the present aches. What follows after the cab's taillights disappear is not silence so much as a new weather system settling over the house. The rooms breathe differently. The kitchen clock ticks loud enough for Edith to hear it from the parlor, and the parlor feels a size larger, though nothing has been moved. Archie sits the way some men wear, a uniform brim, low back straight, a kind of ceremonial stillness that pretends to be comfort. He would never admit it, but the absence is a presence, the way an empty crib can seem heavier than a full suitcase. For a day or two, he treats the gap like an opponent. He can out-talk remarks about California drift, and like stray birds, he swats away with a wave movie stars who can't fill a gas tank, earthquakes that politely schedule themselves for tourists. Hours highways that force cars to speak a foreign language of numbers and letters. Edith lets him perform that weather until it rains itself out. Meanwhile, she replaces ritual with ritual. Breakfast for 2 instead of 5. Plates pre-warmed even when there is no need. A dish towel folded with mathematical precision, because perfection in small things is how you show love for a life that has been rearranged. In the afternoons, the house listens for the sounds. It trained itself to expect Joey's baby Val's Gloria's sing-song calls from the stairs, Michael's mock lectures that begin, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. The noises do not arrive, so other noises learn to take their place. Archie grows fond of the radio as if it were a neighbor leaning over the fence, and he calls out answers to game shows, though no one is keeping score. Edith answers the telephone on the first ring and says hello twice, as if the second hello could lasso a familiar voice from the long distance between Queens and the Pacific. In the late afternoon light, when the day thins and doubt gets loud, she pauses in the hallway and looks toward the door, not because she expects it to open, but because the rightness of loving people is that it makes you look where they used to be. The first postcard arrives like proof that the future exists independently of fear. A picture of a beach where the horizon performs a clean trick ocean, swallowing sun without apology. and a message in Gloria's hand that begins with the housekeeping facts, designed to calm mothers, safe flight, tiny apartment friendly, neighbors a kindly professor with a tweed jacket, and a laugh as round as his glasses. Michael adds a second paragraph whose sentences land like promises fulfilled to campus is greener than he imagined. The department is warmer than rumor. The seminar room smells like chalk and second chances. There is even a tiny smudge where Joey's crumbs found the postcard before the ink dried, and Edith dabs it with her thumb the way a painter might soften a brush stroke. Archie studies the stamp like a customs officer and clears the card for entry into his affection. He tucks it on the mantle beside an old photograph of Christmas and tells himself it is good for a man to have evidence. Evidence is not the same as tranquility. Archie, who measures value by whether it can be lifted, repaired, or joked into behaving, has to invent new tools. He takes long walks to the corner and back, announcing he is inspecting the neighborhood for California encroachment. He polishes the lampposts for any sign that the Pacific has tried to colonize Queens, and when he finds no such sign, he allows himself a small grin that Edith reads as a truce with reality. At Kelsey's, he flirts with the idea of treating the bar like a clubhouse for the newly abandoned. He pushes the door open and waits for the line that will get a laugh, then delivers it with a precision. He prides himself on something about how the left coast must be so far left, the ocean needs a barber to part it back to normal. The regulars chuckle because the rhythm is right, but even they can hear the gravity under the punchline. When the bartender slides him a beer, Archie says thanks without flourish and does not ask to put it on any tab that includes the word future. He begins keeping score in a secret ledger no one else sees. How many days between calls? How many mentions of traffic or sunsets or lectures? How many times Gloria uses the phrase "you should see" instead of "you should be here"? He will deny it under cross-examination, but the math matters because he needs to know whether love can be measured at a distance without being diminished by the measuring. The first phone call is a bright stutter of overlapping sentences, everyone talking at once the way people do when they are not ready to admit they have nothing urgent to say except "I miss you." Edith coos. Gloria translates baby squeals. Michael provides the adult world headlines in a tone that tries not to sound like pride. Archie performs disinterest until the moment he cannot resist and asks whether the streets are safe for a man with common sense. Michael answers with a joke, Archie counters with a different joke, and in that exchange, the two men locate the bridge they have been building. It is not pretty, but it holds. What Gloria learns in the first weeks of the new city is that starting over requires a professional knack for improvisation and a private talent for grief. She welcomes both. The apartment is 2 rooms that pretend to be 3, with windows generous enough to brag about sunsets and thin enough to admit every neighbor's ambition. She and Michael perform a small theater of competence, assembling furniture, arguing amiably about where the crib should face, inventing domestic routines that keep the big unknown from feeling predatory. At odd hours, when the light changes and the clock forgets what time zone it belongs to, she puts her ear to Joey's belly and listens to the ordinary kingdom of a child sleeping. That is the sound she needed to hear to prove that the road between Queens and California is not a betrayal. It is a stretch of air they will cross and recross until homesickness and happiness learn to share a meal. Michael's days fill the way fresh notebooks invite handwriting. He finds that the classroom does for him what argument used to do in Archie's living room. It wakes him up, makes him quick, reminds him that thinking can be a sport. He discovers a mentor whose advice tastes like hard candy sweet on arrival, stubborn if you try to bite it too soon, and a colleague who believes that the best ideas are one step past comfort. He calls home to tell Edith that the campus has a tree older than 3 neighborhoods and a library that smells like patience. He calls to tell Archie that some students will never learn to hold a hammer, but might build astonishing bridges with the right book. He does not say out loud what he knows to be true, that Queens trained him for this by making every argument about something larger than itself. He carries that training into the lecture hall like a contract he intends to honor. Back in Queens, Edith discovers that absence does not cancel purpose. It merely changes its measurements. She starts a new habit, setting 2 extra places at dinner on Thursday nights. Not because anyone will fill them, but because the table understands symbolism. She wraps leftovers for a family that will not arrive and then unwraps them for Archie with a shrug that says, hope is a reasonable ingredient. She also lets herself miss them out loud, which is different from sadness. Missing is active. It has verbs. It writes letters. It answers phones. It hums to itself while it folds laundry that will never leave the drawer. On Fridays, she buys the kind of cookies Joey prefers and eats one slowly as if each bite were a prayer that could cross a continent without postage. When Archie notices, he pretends to complain and then eats one too. Not because he likes it, he does more than he will admit, but because rituals are easier to share than feelings. Archie's friendships shift in the new weather. George Jefferson stops by one afternoon with a businessman's grin and a neighbor's concern. They banter about property values as if banter were an insurance policy against melancholy, but George knows how to read a room and keeps his visit short. Later, Irene and Frank drop off a skillet because somebody said Edith had admired it and because edible gifts are the language of borough diplomacy. They offer gossip disguised as news, who bought the corner building, which church is repainting its hall, why the butcher's nephew will never learn to sharpen a knife, and Edith savors these dispatches the way soldiers savor letters. Describe the peace they are fighting to protect. The first real test of the new arrangement arrives with an ordinary crisis. Joey catches a fever that spikes just high enough to alarm two parents who have not yet memorized the local pediatrician's voice. The doctor is calm, the night is long, and the next day the child is pink-cheeked and indignant at the betrayal of medicine. Yet in that span of hours, Michael and Gloria feel the weight of a choice that suddenly looks less like a map and more like a vow. They agree that if the fever had climbed 1 degree higher, they would have called Queens at once. Not because Queens could have lowered a fever from 3 time zones away, but because love is often measured by whether you are called even when there is nothing you can do. The next postcard mentions none of this. It mentions sunshine and a friendly bookstore and the way Joey laughed at a dog. But the phone call that follows carries a new clarity in Gloria's voice, and Edith hears it and breathes easier. Her daughter has learned the medicine of courage. Archie's ledger begins to transform. He still notes the intervals between contact, but now he also notes the tone of each voice, the confidence level in each sentence, the new phrases that sneak in things like, "We're figuring it out and you'd be proud of us." Pride is a difficult garment for Archie. He prefers indignation's cut and color, but pride begins to fit better the more he wears it, especially when he can convince himself that part of the fabric was woven in his living room through clashes and comebacks, through the stubborn pedagogy of a man who loved his family in a dialect of argument. When a neighbor inquires with that fatal politeness reserved for the bereaved, "How are you managing without the young ones?" Archie answers that he is teaching a master class in peace and quiet. The neighbor laughs. Edith smiles. The remark is half true, which is better than a lie and gentler than silence. Seasons turn the way they always have, unconcerned with human calendars. Autumn sharpens the air in Queens, and Edith takes out the sweaters that know how to hug without squeezing. In California, the same month performs a different magic mornings. Cool enough for a jacket afternoons, warm enough to make you forget you needed one. The family discovers that seasonality can be a conversation instead of a separation. Gloria writes about a farmer's market where citrus glows like jewelry, and a stranger gave Joey a peeled orange as naturally as a blessing. Edith writes back about leaves that go flamboyantly honest before they fall, and how Joey will one day kick through them with the same joy he now brings to sand. Michael writes an excited paragraph about a visiting scholar whose lecture electrified his students. Archie replies with an equally excited paragraph about how the Giants' ground game has finally woken up. They are not talking about the same subjects. They are talking about the same appetite for what matters. On a quiet Sunday, Archie wanders into the church he has spent years defending as a kind of civic tradition, even when he argues with its preacher. He sits near the back as if proximity to the exit were a philosophical stance, and he listens with the alertness of a man waiting to disagree. The homily, however, refuses to give him an easy target. It turns out to be about blessings that do not look like blessings when they arrive, how some are wrapped as losses, how some require you to set a table for a guest who cannot stay, how some teach you the endurance of memory. Archie watches Edith's shoulders relax at each sentence and decides the sermon is acceptable, though he will later insist it was too long. Afterward, they walk home the long way, and he says something sideways about how the porches on their street look friendly today. Edith takes his hand for half a block, not because she needs balance, but because tenderness sometimes needs to be walked like a dog. Eventually, a visit is planned. The decision feels momentous until the practicalities reduce it to the usual chores: airline tickets, neighbors, to feed the cat a list for the plants that never obey lists. Archie resists flying with a catalog of reasons that sound like statistics and are actually anxieties. Edith, who knows which drawer holds his courage, locates it without making a speech. They pack gifts that smell like Queen's Babka from a bakery that refuses to modernize a small toy that squeaks with borough pride, a photo of the vow renewal framed in thrift store gold that makes the moment look antique on purpose. On the plane, Archie performs the nervousness of a man who enjoys being aggrieved on principle. He complains about the peanuts, the seat pitch, the unnatural tilt of clouds. Then he falls asleep for a half hour with his mouth open and wakes insisting he was meditating on air safety. Touchdown rewrites the story in a key neither of them expected. Airports all look the same until the person you love is walking toward you, and then every corridor is a stage and every announcement a soundtrack. Gloria appears first, her smile doing the work of 3 time zones. Michael follows, breaking into that relieved grin he reserves for moments when the future and the past sign a brief peace treaty. And there is Joey conducting the universal orchestra of toddlers with both arms. The reunion is made of ordinary gestures that feel a point at the kiss that lands a hair off the cheek and is corrected with a laugh, the careful transfer of a small boy from one set of arms to another. The first remark about how thin or healthy or handsome someone looks, the exclamation over luggage that might as well be adjectives for love. California proves to be less a place than an argument resolved. The apartment is small, but gloriously theirs. The campus is at once intimidating and homey, an architecture of seriousness softened by benches that invite lingering. Archie pretends to inspect the library shelves for anything subversive and secretly admires the engineers who designed the stacks so cleanly. At a corner cafe, he discovers a sandwich that tastes enough like Queens to be tolerated and enough like California to be a pleasant surprise. Edith finds a secondhand store where the owner speaks kindly about the previous lives of objects, and she buys a little vase because it looks like it is understood being useful for a long time. Joey leads the tour more reliably than any guidebook, dragging his grandparents from marvel to marvel, with a competence that says love recognizes faces before it recognizes streets. The visit invents a new grammar for the family. Mornings begin with shared chores. Archie takes trash down with a dignity that suggests he is carrying out a tradition. Edith makes eggs that taste like home, even in a borrowed kitchen. Michael squeezes oranges into a glass. He swears is more efficient than a cup. And Gloria orchestrates the whole chamber music of domesticity with a baton that doubles as a wooden spoon. Afternoons are excursions calibrated to satisfy everyone. A park with older trees for the nostalgist, a bookstore with newer ideas for the professor, a bakery that speaks fluent comfort for the mother, and a playground that serves as headquarters for the general in training named Joey. Evenings are for stories. Some are long, the kind that begin with "when your mother was little" and end with "the whole room shined by memory." Some are short, a single joke told with gusto because the teller needs to prove he still knows how to throw a punchline. All of them stitch a quilt over the thin places the last few months had worn. On their final night, nobody says final. They cook too much praise, too loudly linger over a dessert that looks homemade even if it isn't. Then Michael speaks with the quick bravery that has become his better habit. He thanks Archie for letting go without letting love shrink. He thanks Edith for translating everyone's clumsy sincerity into sentences that could be heard. Gloria adds a coda about how the vow renewal has continued to do its work, how the words about oaks and cypresses return at odd moments and make decisions easier by making them less possessive. Archie mumbles an insult that means approval and raises his glass half an inch, which is the way some men stand when they are seated. Departure from California is quieter than departure from Queens. Practice makes courage orderly. At the gate, Archie clears his throat and delivers the only guardianship that still makes sense. Simple instructions about seatbelts, then a gruff order to call when they land that is indistinguishable from a blessing. Back in Queens, the house greets them with a smell that reassures and a quiet that does not threaten. Edith unpacks, slowly placing the little vase in a spot that catches morning sun. Archie sets the framed photo from the vow renewal on the mantle, not far from the postcard of the beach, as if the two artifacts were nodding to each other the day we promised and the horizon we promised toward. From then on, the rhythm becomes habit rather than hardship. Calls arrive on the weekends without needing an excuse. Postcards appear for reasons that are really emotions. First day of school, first decent haircut, in the new city, first joke Joey tells that actually lands. Letters include recipes, because recipes are smuggled blessings. They include tiny scandals from the neighborhood, because scandal is a form of oxygen for families who live apart. When holidays come around, choices about who travels where are negotiated with a grace that would have been unthinkable in the old days, not because anyone has become saintly, but because they have learned the arithmetic of generosity. Even Archie, who once measured love by square feet, now measures it by whether people keep their word on time and call back if they miss the first ring. What this long arc finally proves is simple and hard love expands, or it isn't love. The family did not conquer distance by pretending it didn't exist. They built rituals that taught distance to behave: postcards as breadcrumbs, phone calls as bridges, visits as festivals, daily decencies as the grammar of belonging. They did not resolve their differences about what counts as culture or which jokes count as wisdom. They repurposed those differences into a shared comedy that keeps everyone humble. They did not turn Archie into someone else. They helped him discover that blessing is a role he had been auditioning for all his life without knowing it. Edith, steady as a metronome, showed the others that kindness is not a strategy but a metabolism. Gloria proved that a daughter can become a mother without resigning either job. Michael learned that ambition shines best when it lights other people's faces too. And Joey, who began this chapter as a bundle of needs, grows into a child who gives gifts without knowing they are gifts. First words, first steps, first cheerful bossiness, teaching everyone how to be at home in more than one place. Some nights when Queens is being especially honest and the sky above the street lamps looks like velvet sprinkled with salt, Archie sits in his chair and drafts his own history in the quiet between commercials. He will not write it down, but he composes it anyway. A list of things he thought were permanent that turned out to be practice. A list of things he thought would break him that turned out to be doors. He does not change his politics in these reveries, and he does not revise the past to make himself prettier. He does something rarer. He admits to himself, if to no one else, that the bravest line he ever spoke was 6 words long and came at a door. Everything since has been a sequel where the hero learns that not winning is not the same as losing. It is often the requirement for loving better. If you asked him, he would shrug and say the family is fine, which is his word for blessed. If you asked Edith, she would describe in unnecessary detail the proper way to fold a dish towel when you are expecting a phone call. If you asked Michael and Gloria, they would talk over each other about seminars and sunsets and the way their son has learned to say Grandma with a Queens inflection that no ocean could swallow. And if you asked Joey, he would point to the phone and shout a name with the absolute certainty of a boy who has never learned that geography is supposed to be difficult. That certainty is the trophy this family has earned.